John. All right. Welcome everyone to tonight's work session on community power for Monday, February 13th. I don't have much to do to pass it over to Henry Herdon, the Community Power Coalition, but I'd like to thank Councillor Tabor for all the effort that has gotten us to this point. I'm sure that there's a lot that goes into any of these things, but John has been on this for quite a while and put a lot of work into it. So happy that we can be here this evening to hear the latest in advance of some upcoming dates that are going to be important. So, Henry?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Portsmouth City Council, for inviting me out. I'm pleased to join you and to talk through a status update of the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire and how that applies to the city of Portsmouth, and how the city and its residents might, in the very near future, begin to start benefiting from some rate relief and expanded energy choices. Before we dive in, we've got a lot of really detailed material on how this startup power agency that was created by New Hampshire cities, towns, and counties, where it is at, what its status is. We're going to get into all the details of that. I want to just sort of note up front, it's been a real pleasure working with the Portsmouth Energy Advisory Committee. You have really strong capacity on that committee. You've got folks from the utility sector, from the energy industry more broadly, communications team that's been really successful with their survey and getting the word out. So I work with committees all across the state. You've got a really good team, and you're lucky to have that team. And part of what this coalition does is build relationships and bring together that sort of community level leadership in a statewide fashion, not just to procure power and to get more affordable rates, but really to sort of lift the hood on how does the power sector operate, and to give cities and towns insight into our power markets and really oversight so that the benefits that we've seen large energy users get from this competitive energy market, we can give those benefits to residential customers and to small business customers as well. That's really what this is about. This sort of this statewide coalition and the role that Portsmouth is playing in it, and the connections with all the other communities across the state, I think are sort of a theme we'll talk about. And part of that is governance, is giving our cities and towns greater governance over their energy decisions. So with that, I'll move through some presentation materials. There are also some really good questions that came up at the committee public hearing last week, and a number of those are addressed in this presentation, and I'll try to talk through them as well, because there are a lot of details, and one of the things we'll get into are some of the key policies and contracts that will be brought to the City Council for review and approval. I'll just name those briefly. There's a cost sharing agreement, which is the overarching contract that ensures costs are fairly shared across all the member cities, towns, and counties. And those costs are all paid for through electric rates, not through taxpayer funds. But that's something that is on the horizon in after this electric aggregation plan. And then there's a rates policy, a reserves policy, financial reserves policy, and an energy portfolio risk management policy, and a data protection policy. So these are where all the nitty-gritty details of how this operates are outlined, and these are the documents that will be brought to the city for review and consideration. So there's detailed material there. We'll talk through them at a high level, but I do want to just foreshadow that that's on the horizon for the city. So coming back up from the nitty gritty, we'll do a refresher on what community power is. This is as a result of recent legislation. The city of Portsmouth can become the default electricity supplier, can bulk procure electricity on behalf of the collective residents and businesses. The utility company Eversource will own and operate the grid and deliver that power, and there are a number of benefits we've seen demonstrated in other states and markets. Lower rates and really giving the residents access to green power options. And what we'll talk about later in the presentation are some of the deeper innovations developing local energy generation that directly provides economic benefit and rate relief for residents and businesses. So the RSA, it's 53E, and these programs are entirely voluntary when they launch, and customers can choose to come and go as they please without penalty. The Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire was created on October 1st, 2021, a little more than a year ago, by an initial 14 cities, towns, and counties. Portsmouth joined very shortly thereafter. This nonprofit agency, it's governed by the collective membership. Kevin Charette, Peter Rice sit on the board of directors and represent Portsmouth there. Kevin's actually the vice chair of the board. And each member community has appointed representatives to govern and oversee this new power agency, this new power supplier that will serve the members collectively. So there's currently 29 communities. The city of Berlin just joined today. And there's a significant economy of scale in that collective buying power. It's over 100,000, 125,000 customers approximately at full enrollment. That's a significant volume of electricity sale and significant cash flow, significant revenue that will flow through this nonprofit, works on behalf of the communities, and allows communities like the city of Portsmouth to accrue a reserve fund and collect reserves for the longevity of the program to keep rates low over time and to give other benefits to their communities. So at full enrollment of the collective communities, that's approximately $140 million per year in revenue. The vast majority flows to the purchase of electricity, but there is revenue that flows to the overhead and the operating costs, as well as the reserve fund that's governed by the financial reserve policy, and that Portsmouth could create discretionary reserves out of over time. So the initial wave, if you will, of cities and towns, up to a dozen. Right now, 9 have executed the authorizing contracts, the cost-sharing agreement, the member services contract, adopted those policies. 9 have done that and are planning to launch in April. There are a couple of others, Portsmouth included, that have the option of launching programs in April, May, June timeframe. Dover's on that list. Nashua's on that list. A couple of others. And then beyond that, there's sort of a second wave of another dozen to 15 cities and towns that are more on track to go live in 2024.
And Henry, you're talking to another 30 or 40 towns as we speak, right?
That's right. So then there's, that's just the ones that have done that first hurdle of joint powers agreement, become a member, put someone on the board. There's another over 30 that are interested. We actually have a forum for those communities next week, a virtual forum to invite them all in and give a status update and bring them into the membership if they would choose to join. And as Portsmouth well knows, membership is a seat at the table without any commitment. And your commitment, it doesn't even come with the approval of your plan. It comes later on after you've reviewed the contracts and really up until the point in which we procure power and you have a good degree of certainty of what your rate will be. So yeah, thank you, Kevin. And I do welcome questions as I go. So please do interrupt me. I'm happy to sort of have this be conversational if that's the pleasure of the council.
When was the date which you had said, not this first wave they're signing up, but the first opportunity Portsmouth would have if we wanted to go prior to 2024?
Likely June. So if you were to approve your electric irrigation plan, which is actually already being reviewed by the state, you could go, you could potentially, you have the opportunity to launch a program in May or June of this year. And right now, those 9 communities are looking at very favorable headroom, very favorable, the cost of the utilities supply rate and the cost of power in the market. There's a significant difference there. This spring in particular is a very advantageous time to go to market and both give the residents and businesses lower rates and collect financial reserves out the gate for the program's long-term benefit. So this next slide just talks about some of the overarching benefits which we've discussed, but really there's the joint and local control. This group of communities across the state has vetted industry experts. We ran a competitive solicitation, hired some of the best talent in the country to operate power procurement, and we'll get into who the vendors are. And there's a strong emphasis on education and informed decision-making through this transparent, publicly, the coalition is subject to right to know and all of these transparency and public interest provisions. So that's a strong emphasis. Obviously, lower costs are a benefit. We've seen other markets demonstrate that. A number of communities are excited about the possibility to build energy generation in New Hampshire that is cost effective and that lowers rates and supports our economic development, renewable energy, and solar or energy storage. And we'll get into that on some later slides. And yeah, there's a lot of potential for innovating. So we can go to the next slide. This is going to just summarize some of the big milestones that the coalition has accomplished collectively. Over 100 public meetings of the board and 6 committees, of which, Kevin, you serve on, I guess, 2 committees and the board. And there have been significant legislative and policy advantages to moving forward beneficial legislation, including legislation related to community power, and really writing the rules at the Public Utility Commission. We have expertise like the board chair Clifton Belo from the city of Lebanon, who's been a legislator, he's been a regulator, and who has deep technical ability there, but also the collective advocacy power of this membership has been a real strength in state policy issues. I mentioned the solicitation to bring on industry-leading experts to operate the agency. That's also come with $750,000 in startup funds and considerable credit support from Ascend and Calpine. So $8.5 million in credit support to finance the initial power procurement for this first wave. I mentioned the policies, energy portfolio risk management, retail rates, financial reserves, data security, and these are all available as links in the presentation. And yeah, I mentioned some of these other policies. And what the vendor Ascend Analytics does, what they've done for us is they've conducted a technical assessment and forecasted the financials of procurement for these communities, around 100 simulations, and really stress tested what this will look like as we go live. This is a company that they run procurement for major utilities and other community power agencies across the country, and they're bringing a real depth of technical expertise to support the cities and towns collectively.
Can I jump in again?
Please.
The $8.5 million in credit support, is that from renewable energy credits, or is that a different type of credit?
That is capital to purchase power. To essentially, we're going to buy electricity in February, March, April, and then revenue will begin to flow in from customers in April, May, June. Somebody needs to essentially finance that initial power procurement. So that is the capital that will purchase electricity, and then the coalition will repay that through the revenues from selling electricity across the communities. And it's a good question because the vendor team is very flexible, and while they are providing credit to finance the initial power procurement, they're very collaborative in allowing that CPC&H will quickly shift away from external financing and towards self-financing of projects. So as the coalition launches, it will begin to sell electricity, it will collect revenue, and it'll pay for the electricity, it'll pay off the financing costs, and it will accrue cash reserves. And over time, we can use those cash reserves that are really owned and controlled by the communities to self-finance and to provide our own credit, which is going to lower costs. So there is a financing cost, there's an interest cost associated with that credit. This is just showing the membership across the state and the scale again. So the red bar is representing the current membership as compared to the utility companies. So Eversource, if you combine the dark gray and the light gray with the dotted line, that is the current scale of Eversource energy supply. And then the dotted line is representing, assuming all these communities switch to community power. What's left is the gray. So red is current membership, blue is interested communities, and this is just illustrating that if 12 go live this year and another 15 the next year, and then the interested communities all come online in 3 years, then this coalition will quickly become the largest default electricity provider in the state. So already that red bar is larger than Unitil total and Liberty and New Hampshire Electric Cooperative. I mentioned governance. This is just a list of the board directors. And we just want to sort of re-emphasize there are folks on this board with policy expertise and experience from the utility sector, from the competitive energy side of the business, folks who have founded energy companies, municipal officials, and municipal managers. So there's a broad depth of experience on the board that are all weighing in across the different committees and participating in some fashion in overseeing the startup of the coalition. And I mentioned the 100+ public meetings. This is just showing part of what the coalition does is we streamline implementation. This is the development of your plan, providing the template, providing technical expertise to help you customize that plan, and then again, Portsmouth has done a really fantastic job of engaging the public. So you have a lot of capacity there, but there are aspects that the coalition supports with as well in terms of messaging and branding and logo development. We talked about governance. The other side is operations. So hiring expert firms who are equipped to manage procurement and manage customer service. Ascend Analytics has been contracted with to provide for energy hedging and energy portfolio management. They will monitor the energy market day to day, week to week, month to month to ensure we're entering into the best deals and contracts and hedges to get the best rates for communities. They also have the ability to do deal valuation. So communities want to develop or contract with a developer to build a solar array in the state. They're very equipped to assess and compare different options to help select the most cost-effective and the most beneficial project development opportunities. Calpine Energy Solutions, retail customer services and load serving entity services. They will really, there's a lot of data management and data sharing with utility companies. So utilities will transmit all of the customer account information, metering and billing information, and things of that nature, and will collect the revenues through the utility billing of the customers. Calpine manages all of that behind the scenes, as well as customer opt-in, opt-out, opt-up. So an individual customer can choose to leave at any time. That's through Calpine customer service, call center, things of that nature, as well as what was the other piece I was going to mention? That's escaped me, but I think that summarizes roughly Calpine's role. Clean Energy New Hampshire has been partnered with. They're a local nonprofit that does a lot of public engagement, so they're supporting in that regard. There are a number of law firms, some startup consultants, and a banking institution who will administer the secure revenue account where revenues flow into and then flow out of to pay energy suppliers, service providers, and then accrue as reserve. This is a little bit busy, but just trying to put all the pieces in one picture on the slide so you can see at the top. These are all the communities sitting on the board of directors, providing oversight and manning the committees, which are listed on the left: risk management, regulatory legislative affairs, member operations and engagement, CEO search, etc. And then on the right, you have the legal, the consultants, and then the service providers across the bottom and their different roles. So I don't know, other, I was going to see if there might be questions on this. It's a lot visually, but we're happy to move on as well. So we're going to get a little bit into the technical assessment conducted by Ascend Analytics. So one of the key takeaways is, as a result of these 100 model runs, the assessment finds that we can expect 16% lower costs than utility default across those 100 runs. And that's shown in a probability distribution on the top left there, that blue line chart. That's illustrating sort of the percentage probability of benefit ranging in really the 12 to 20% range. That's what we can expect. Part of the reason for this is because of the advantage competitive supply entities have over utilities. Utility companies are very constrained. They're required to go into the market at set times twice per year, and they have no control over that. So whenever their 6 months is up, they just take whatever price the market has to offer, because that's the regulated bind they are in. Competitive suppliers and the coalition can actively go into the market when we choose. We can have some short-term, some medium-term, some longer-term contracts, and this active portfolio management really demonstrates lower rates than the utility approach. And we see this in another non-regulated entity is the New Hampshire Electric Cooperative. They are a utility in the state that is not regulated because they're owned by their members. They're cooperatively owned. They use this portfolio management approach, and they consistently deliver supply rates lower than the utility company.
Henry, if I could just, kind of a classic example was last year where the utility rates were about 10 cents per kilowatt hour in the first half of the year, and the utilities went out to bid in June, and we all know what was going on in our world in June of last year after the beginning of the war, et cetera, and we ended up with rates of 22 cents. So they go out to bid in June for rates that are going to get set in August of 2022, and it just happened to be that was the market in June of 2022, and the utilities across not only New Hampshire but New England ended up with the rates that we do, because it was just a one-time procurement process in the month of June, and rates went from 10 cents to 22 cents.
Right.
So that gives a structural advantage.
That's right.
And it's worth noting, too, that the co-op, which is also nonprofit and uses a portfolio approach, when things spiked to 22 cents, they held at 17.
Right.
And I think their experience is really what we're looking at doing.
Right. And so what that translates to in our forecast over the first 5 years of operation with new communities coming online is $60 million in customer savings across that collective customer base, as well as $85 million in accrual of financial reserves. These are reserves that the coalition will hold jointly, and maybe the market changes, the market goes up, we can lean on those reserves to keep rates low over time, and then they also are a mechanism to finance projects that will also lower rates over time. And there's a slide coming up on that.
So just one quick question. When it's phrased as it is that the utility companies are required to procure energy twice a year, that on its face seems ridiculous. But why are they required to do that? Is there any advantage that a utility company would say, or the state legislator that put that bill forth to regulate utilities in such a way would argue is a benefit of a twice yearly procurement process?
It's a good question. I think part of the theory is you can have consistency because you know that the utility is only going at certain times. What's been shown is it's not effective. There is an investigation that the regulator, the Public Utility Commission, has begun to look into this to say, well, is there another better way utilities should buy power? Essentially asking the same question you just asked. That hasn't resulted in anything, and those processes tend to take considerable time. I think, sorry, Kevin, did you want to jump in? Or
No, this is the way it's been since deregulation back in 2000. Utilities were always meant to be the provider of last resort. The thought was the markets were going to open up 20 years ago, and those who didn't choose, or because of credit and collection issues, had to come back to the utility. It was the provider of last resort, and it has kind of turned out to just be the opposite. They're the primary provider, and often, though, the energy markets have been kind of sleepy. So the fact that they do go out twice a year, you see ebbs and flows, and it goes higher in the winter time, but you haven't seen spikes like we saw recently or back in the polar vortex a few years ago. So the fact that they go out twice a year, while the portfolio management process would, I think, always beat it, there hasn't been as much media attention on the utility process as there was in this past year.
Okay. And then I guess another follow-up, would the models change if we had all of the communities in New Hampshire join? Another way of asking it is, are we delivering power to people that maybe delivery charges or infrastructure to deliver the power is lower, or does everybody in the state of New Hampshire get power in the same way? So it doesn't matter if we bring a 800-person town up in Pittsburgh, New Hampshire on. Does that question make sense?
it does. So the answer is it's less about geography or size, and it's more about how do the energy users in that town use energy. So if there are, let's say, lots of businesses on the utility supply that only run power from 12 p.m. to 6 p.m., they're going to be way more expensive. And I don't know why they would be that way, but you can look at how the different load profiles are, how different energy usage patterns are across communities, and that can change costs. And the structure of the coalition is to the degree possible, ensure that certain towns and certain energy users that are more expensive to serve will pay for those extra costs. And the towns and users that are less expensive to serve will not pay any extra cost for that. So when we get into the cost sharing agreement, it's all about ensuring costs are fairly distributed and you don't have one town or customer cross-subsidizing another.
Thanks.
And I think this next slide is going to be a useful one as well. So this is showing essentially the stack of revenue allocation. Important to note that rates will be uniform across the members and across the utility territories at launch. And then one of the questions that came up was how much is the startup cost that we're paying back? And that comes out to 0.01% of revenues over 5 years. So in the stack right now we have, if you look at the bar chart on the left, utility prices are at 20 cents right now. So that full bar chart stack is the current utility rate. And the full bar is the forecasted utility rate for each period. The shaded area at the top of the bar, that is the customer discount anticipated, and then the green portion is the allocation to reserve funds. The remainder of the bar from blue down through the bottom is the cost of power and operations. So this is similarly represented in the pie chart in the middle. You see yellow, that's how much of the revenue is flowing to energy cost, and then yellow, orange, green, brownish, those are really all the energy costs. Those are all of the wholesale electricity market costs. Importantly, in blue, we have 4% of that is going to pay for operations. That's financing and operations. And the green slice of the pie is, again, the reserve accrual. On the far right, this is sort of simplifying that down. The red is just representing all of the energy costs lumped together. The blue is the cost of operations, the vendor team and the overhead and the financing. And then that 17% at the top is the anticipated margin, which is shared between two things. So 17% of value, a portion of that is seen by the customers as rate discount, and a portion of that is collected as reserves for the benefit of the collective membership.
And just to give a little more context, our committee wanted to figure out the best way to do a community power program, and we spent the fall of 2021 researching, should we just go to a power broker as Portsmouth and give him all our load? Well, the blue, the green and the gray there, the savings versus the default utility default rate, that would have gone to the broker. But instead, it goes to the customer and it goes to the reserve fund. And the reserve fund, we'll have to take a bigger chunk of the rate to start, but that reserve fund builds up quickly, and then that's the stability. When we get these price shocks, we can buffer those price shocks and keep rates stable for the ratepayers. So, again, the advantage of a nonprofit by governments for governments is all of the benefits of the bulk purchasing are going into serving the ratepayers in one form or another.
And I'll just follow up a little bit on that. I agree with almost everything you said. One thing I would just adjust a little bit. You could go with a broker contract, and on day one, the customers might get savings. They likely would get savings. What you cannot ensure is long-term savings, because you may be locking into a 24-month contract. And if you lock into a 24-month contract, let's say at 16 cents right now, that looks really good in the far left bar chart, because the bar chart goes up to 20 cents, you lock in at 16 cents, you're very happy. But then if you look at August 23, January 24, oh no, the market is expected to fall to 12 cents. So you could find yourself in a situation where you're in a 24-month contract that looked very good on day one, but then the utilities went out and came back, and now they're much cheaper than you, but you're stuck with that broker contract. So that's, I think, one of the advantages of the coalition is the ability to change rates over time to maintain the discount to the utility. And then I agree completely, really, the other value is that green portion, that's the broker's net profit or the supplier's profit, whereas through this coalition, that's actually accruing for the community's benefit. So we do have a slide or two on projects, and I do want to be clear, there will not be any projects developed in 2023. The coalition may begin to entertain contracts with project developers as soon as 2024, but these will take time. That being said, all of the information from our technical assessment indicates that the extent to which the coalition can develop generation projects on behalf of members will translate into revenue for the coalition or cost reduction for the customers. So there's a lot of incentives coming from the federal government. The Inflation Reduction Act in particular has investment tax credits, or really direct payments to municipalities developing energy projects. And there are incentives that can cover a significant portion of project costs, up to 50% of project cost. There are also state level policies to provide for pilots. Right now, we can, under current law, develop up to 8 megawatts of generation. These are community scale projects. And those projects directly lower some of the costs of electricity. They can lower some of the wholesale costs from ISO New England. They can lower the need to pay for transmission costs, interstate transmission costs. If you're just buying power from a local generator, you don't have to pay for shipping power in from out of state, essentially. So this is exciting for a number of communities, and it's more on the 12 to 24 month timeframe while this will get serious, but I will note that there are energy developers across the state that are very eagerly sort of knocking on our doors saying, when are you going to be ready to entertain contracts with us? And our understanding is that these will be financially advantageous. And this is more on that, just illustrating some of the number crunching done by Ascend. But the base case forecast assumes we just develop 1 2-megawatt project, and the city of Lebanon is looking at building a landfill gas to energy project. They have a landfill, creates natural gas. They're in the process of building a turbine to generate electricity from that energy source. So that would result in $350,000 to $500,000 approximately per year in revenue or reduced cost as compared to other options. And then there's some other scenarios, what would it look like if we built 8 megawatts? What would it look like if we lifted the caps on these pilots? Part of the benefit of this coalition is that the public advocacy piece and having communities have a collective voice in the State House and in the Public Utility Commission, where some of these decisions are being made and where there is certainly room for improvement in the policy landscape. There are regulatory barriers that could be addressed.
I have a question on the concept of whether it's community power, municipalities working with community power to build small-scale generators like that. Am I correct that the electricity would still go into the grid, so you're just getting electrons or electricity at the end of the day?
Yes and no. So part of the reason these projects reduce cost is if you have a generator in New Hampshire that is plugged into the New Hampshire grid that is selling power to a community in New Hampshire in that same grid, and if that generator is putting power online at peak times when power is most expensive, it's physically lowering transmission costs. It's physically lowering capacity. It's lowering certain aspects of the cost. And so we're connecting the physical power's value and with the accounting and the finances for that. So I'm not sure if this really answers your question, but yes, it is. It is accounting. It's power goes into the ocean of the grid and power comes out. It's not the identical electron that the customer gets at the end of the day. But to the degree that we can align local generation and local buyers of that power, we can lower costs. Does that answer your question?
It does, and as a follow-up, and you might get to this at some point, I know this is nothing like net metering, but a criticism of net metering has always been that people who could afford net metering, who could afford the solar panels, are passing on the cost of the utility transmission. So is there any passing on of costs if, let's say, Portsmouth does sign up and a number of communities sign up? Will we be passing on the cost of transmission to communities that don't sign up?
It's a great question. The answer is no.
I didn't think so.
The opposite is true. So right now, under certain state laws, if you build a generator and you lower the transmission cost, you don't get paid for that. Everyone else is benefiting, and you're not actually getting rewarded for lowering those costs. And what we need to do is actually incentivize proper behavior, which is bringing power online when it is cost effective. Other examples of this are when you get into sort of the virtual power plants. You could have 100 batteries in 100 homes that shift folks' usage away from peak times, and they should be compensated for that. We are kind of, I don't want to get too into the weeds of time of use rates and things like that, but they are an eventual possibility that are associated with these programs.
Cool.
And one other benefit is that, let's say Portsmouth wants to build a 5-megawatt solar field. We could have a contract with the coalition to sell the power, which would enable us to get a revenue anticipation bond and borrow at municipal tax-free rates to build the project.
Yes.
And then and of course it goes into the coalition at a purchase below the high fossil fuel costs and gets sold back to our residents.
Right. So these are, we can self-finance through revenue bonding, yes.
Right.
And then, I mean, a part of this technical assessment is, when does the coalition get a credit rating? A lot of this is the building towards long-term financial ability to finance projects. Yeah. I'm going to really leave this, I think, for review if the council wants to dig into any of it. There are some takeaways here, but I think we've summarized a lot of this, a lot of text on the slide. This is more of a, I think, follow-up. Unless, I don't know, Kevin, is there anything you want to call attention to?
I think you've covered it.
Yeah. So we're going to shift and we're going to talk about process. So Portsmouth the committee's done a lot of work for a year plus, a couple of years. The plan has been heard at 2 public hearings. There's been some public input. The next steps we'll walk through here, but there will be the enabling agreements. Those are the policies, the cost sharing agreement, the member services contract. The Public Utility Commission will have to approve the plan, and then we'll move into really the procurement and rate setting. So this is illustrating all the authorization documents. On the left, we have the cost sharing agreement. This is a framework. This is ensuring that, to the extent possible, each town will pay its fair share and will not pay for costs that another town caused. So that is a contract that will come before the city, and you'll likely want to have staff and legal review that and fully understand that.
And a key point too, Henry, is the startup costs are more or less going to be amortized over a period of time, but any community that comes online over the next 5 years will pay their fair share of the startup costs. So it's not just the communities that are going live this spring and perhaps next spring that would pay the startup costs that have occurred over the past many months. So there's a pretty detailed process in the cost sharing agreement that all communities, there's a process where they almost repay the communities that paid initially. So everybody pays their fair share over the first 5-year period of startup costs.
Thank you, Kevin. So Portsmouth could execute the cost sharing agreement, and there is still no liability. There's still no decision that has been made. The real decision comes in the member services contract, and that's the contract that says the coalition will provide all of the procurement and customer services on your behalf, and you are authorizing us to procure power for you and administer the program. There's still a trigger where you can drop out before the actual procurement, but that is essentially the contract that authorizes the coalition to be your service provider. On the right, we have the policies that govern all of this. So there is an energy portfolio risk management policy. This ensures that we are using industry best practices in how we go into the market, how we hedge power, and there are parameters and there are financial safeguards there to ensure that there's no risky strategies being used. This relates to the retail rates policy, which is how we set our electric rates, and it relates to the financial reserve policy, which is how we collect financial reserves. So there's this trade-off, right? How much of our benefit go to customer rate savings and how much of our benefit accrues in our financial reserve. And this is a direct trade-off that is addressed in these policies. I'll also just note that there are really 3 types of reserves. There's a joint reserve, which is on behalf of the collective membership, and the coalition will track exactly what portion of that reserve is associated with each town and city, but the cities and towns can't withdraw from that. It's held in joint reserves for the collective benefit. There are also excess reserves. If we ever exceed a reserve threshold, that will be dispersed back to the communities, and then there are discretionary reserves. The discretionary reserve is, over time, the City of Portsmouth could say, okay, utility rate's 20 cents. Coalition is giving us 16 cents. What if we made that 17 cents and we took a cent a kilowatt hour for our own discretionary reserve fund? To say we want to have a special program or project to invest in the community's energy efficiency. This isn't required, but this is an option that will become available as discretionary reserves that each individual city or town could make use of.
And just to put it in a little additional perspective, when we talk about excess reserves, it's over 180 days of operating expenses. So the target is for the coalition to always have 120 days of operating expenses in the reserve, and 180 days is the top. And once we go above 180, then they are excess reserves and can be passed on to the communities to deposit into their discretionary reserve bucket. So that's just when we talk about the bucket, it's actually a number of days of operating costs that the coalition wants to have stashed away at all times.
And another key point, I think this was a question that was raised, is what is the term of the agreement? So this member services contract, the blue bottom left, it has a 36-month term, and there are termination provisions. So Portsmouth could terminate at any time within that 36-month term, provided that no costs are shifted to other members. So say Portsmouth wants to terminate, and there's some costs that would be picked up by the other members. You could choose to terminate early and just allocate your portion of the reserve fund to cover those costs. Similarly, you could terminate and say, okay, we're going to leave the coalition, and after the term expires, the portion of the reserve associated with Portsmouth would be returned to the city of Portsmouth. So you say, all right, we're going to leave after this 36-month term, and really in the initial period, if you terminate the first year, there's a 24-month period. But whatever portion of the reserve that is collected on behalf of Portsmouth would be returned to the city of Portsmouth. So they are your reserves. They're held jointly, but they're your reserves if you wish to take your business elsewhere for some reason. We don't envision this occurring for any reason because we think the collective benefit of staying with the coalition will prove out, but it is provided for in these policies. Again, this is perhaps more for review because there's a lot of text here, but this is detailing how are we fairly sharing costs, what are the different categories of cost, what is it, general and administrative cost versus actual costs of procurement, and just really emphasizing, to the maximum extent practical, to Councilor Denton's question, each community and each ratepayer will pay their share of costs as opposed to paying for other folks' costs. And again, this is a good reference slide, but this is mapping out what is exactly the process going to look like. So we'll go through the sort of colored lines one by one. And first, the city will adopt the electric aggregation plan, and then in the red, the city would consider, review, and adopt the agreements we just showed, these enabling agreements, the policies, cost-sharing agreement, member services contract. And within that, you select an individual who is authorized to essentially cancel, to back out up until the point we execute contracts, power contracts. In orange, the risk management committee meets and will say, here's what the market looks like today. Utilities at 20 cents, cost of power is what the cost of power is. We can go into the market and buy power for you at this price. And at that point in time, Portsmouth can decline or can say, yes, we'll move forward. Then there will be, the board will, or the committees will convene to recommend rates, and the board will set and approve the rate. So the board has ultimate authority to set the electricity rate. And again, this is part of this structure is giving the communities the oversight and the insight into how do we balance this trade-off of accruing financial reserves and giving customers discounts on electricity. And again, it's a long and short-term benefit, right? Because the way you're going to give customers benefit or discounts on electricity in the long term is to build up some reserves early. And then customers will be enrolled in the program. And so these next two slides are just sort of bringing it back out to the customer-facing perspective. We just really went under the hood of, the technical and the financial aspects of how this works behind the scene. What does this look like for the customer? They'll have a menu of products. They can have the cheapest minimum renewable energy Granite Basic product, and that could be Portsmouth's default that everyone is enrolled in. And then there's a 33% Granite Plus renewable energy, and then Clean 50 and Clean 100, which are optional products any customer could choose if they wanted to invest in clean energy or renewable energy credits, really. And then on the next slide, this is just summarizing the notification and enrollment process. So after the proper authorizations are made, the coalition will issue a mailed notification to every electric account 30 days in advance. Welcome to Portsmouth Community Power. Here's your cheaper rate compared to the utility rate. Go to this website if you want to opt out. Go to this website if you want to pick Clean 50 or Clean 100. And the customer can make that decision. And then if you're on competitive supply, if you shop in the market yourself, you'll get that notification, but you will not be affected unless you affirmatively go to the website and enroll. And then the program will commence, and at any point in time thereafter, a customer could choose to depart if they would choose to do so. And I think that might be the end of the material. So this is just for your reference. These are the key documents. They are hyperlinked in the electronic copy. So they're available for review by the city. And again, there's 9 cities and towns that have adopted the policies and approved the contracts and are looking at an April launch. And I'm happy to have any other discussion or questions from the council.
Thank you, Henry. Any other questions? It said 2. How many megawatts does Portsmouth use? Anybody have that idea?
It's in our EAP.
It's in the plan.
It is in the plan.
Just a second.
And then do we know how many people, as a percentage, have opted out of the utilities and gone to competitive suppliers?
About 20%.
20%. All right.
And that shows in the survey too.
Okay, and Allison, I think you're going to go through the
Yes.
survey
Yep.
data now?
Yes.
Excellent. Do we have another presentation?
We do. Give me
All right.
1 second.
Just to tee this up, as part of building our energy aggregation plan, we wanted to find out what people wanted in a community power program. So this will be the raw feedback from more than 400 people. And I think you'll see surprising demand for the Green 50 and Green 100. And you'll also see that people want to save money and have more renewable options.
Okay, so these results were from the survey that was available for people online from January 19th to February 8th. And then it was closed. And this is just a high-level overview. And the first couple of questions and the last couple of questions on the survey were multiple choice. And then there was a section that was where we asked people to rate things, and I'll talk about that separately. But we had 419 participants, which we considered to be quite good. The far majority were Portsmouth homeowners. If you look at the 2 numbers on the right-hand side, first you have the number of actual people that said, so it was 357 people were homeowners in Portsmouth, and that was 85.2% of the whole survey number. Portsmouth tenants were 49, 11.7%. Portsmouth landlord there were 3 of them, 0.7%. Portsmouth businesses, there were 2 of them, 0.5%. And then other, which are people that are landlords and homeowners, or business owners and homeowners, so they were multiples. And we had 8 of those, and it was 1.9%. So when we asked who is your electricity supplier, the far majority said Eversource. That was 78.5%. However, there was 21% that have a third-party supplier right now. And then there were 2 people that didn't know. We asked if your answer to question 1 was Eversource, why did you make that choice? And the largest reason given was that they didn't know they had an option, and that was 39.9%, 40% of people. I had no reason to look for a different supplier, was 11.7%. I tried to switch but could not find a supplier with better rates, was 6.7%. Then other, and some of the reasons for other were laziness, lack of trust, didn't know how to switch, things like that. And that was 21.7% of people. And then not applicable, that again is the group that did not choose Eversource. So these are the third-party suppliers, and that was 20%. So which option would be most important to you in the Portsmouth Community Power program? So there were a couple of interesting things on this slide. So if you look at the first line and the 4th line down, the first one was lowest cost energy option, and that was 33.2%. But there were actually more people that said the same or lower cost with more renewable energy content than I have today, and that was 37% of people. Then we had a certain group that wanted 50% more renewable energy, and some that wanted 100% more renewable energy, and that actually turned out to be about 20% of the people as well. Other people that answered this question and said that reliability was very important to them. And then 2 people again didn't know. So this next section, what we asked people to do was to rank from 0 to 10, with 0 being the lowest priority and 10 being the highest priority. And then we took the average of those numbers. And the ability to increase energy efficiency and reduce costs was, the average was about 8.7 on that rating scale. So that was a pretty high priority. The next thing was control of energy costs. So again, it was 8.7, a pretty high priority. And interestingly, increased renewable energy sources, including locally generated, was also fairly high at 7.5%, or 7.5 average of that. And so that's just a high-level overview that we got from this survey.
Thanks, Allison. Next up, I think we're going to talk about the timeline.
Yes.
Kevin's going to handle that.
Yep. I just, Mayor, I wanted to answer your question before in terms of the stats, and it's in the energy aggregation plan, but the customers in Portsmouth right now that are with the utility with Eversource are close to 13,000, and that's about 163,000 megawatt hours. And we have about 2,600 that are on competitive supply, and that's 260 megawatt hours. Those are the larger industrial customers, as well as the municipal accounts are counted there, but it's referenced in the EAP. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to quickly go over the schedule that would support a June launch. I'll go to the next slide. So just I'll go through this pretty quickly. The survey was launched back in January. Thank you to Allison and to Stephanie in the back row there. They teamed up and did a wonderful job on that. And from our experience, I think it's one of probably the most used survey in the state in terms of municipality that's done a survey with over 400 participants. We had the press release that went out in January. I think it actually went out a little earlier than January 31st, which was helpful. We had our 2 public hearings back on the 2nd and 9th. Last Friday, the energy aggregation plan was filed with the PUC, and that starts a 60-day clock. They have 60 days to review the energy aggregation plan, and they either can not have any comment, and then it's automatically approved after 60 days, or they may get back to us with some questions. But that's kind of the long kind of pole in the tent right now, if you will. We have to wait 60 days for that, for them to review and approve it. They may approve it earlier, but their track record with other communities is they've stuck with the statute that allows them 60 days.
If I could just add, Kevin.
Sure.
The PUC's review is does this comply with RSA 53E? It's not a review of our program and its merits or anything like that. Is it legal according to 53E? And there's a specific provision that allows cities and towns to submit that to start the clock before their governing body, because obviously in town meeting towns, you've only got once a year. So we felt that was a wise step.
And we have, I don't know, a dozen or so communities that have had their plans already approved, and we're modeling our document after those. So, I think there's a high probability that our plan would get approved without any significant modifications.
And just a quick follow-up, if there is a question, does that restart the clock?
Yes. If we amend the plan, it does restart the clock.
If it's a minor adjustment, Henry, does it?
So yeah, it's if the commission deems it does not comply with the law, then it would restart the clock.
Okay.
But we've had Henry review our plan, so we're pretty confident. So then we're on the schedule for the 21st for approval of the plan to be considered by the council. And then we've also targeted March 20th for those key governance documents that Henry mentioned, that those would get approved by, again, if this is a schedule for a June launch, that they'd be approved in the March timeframe, and Councilor Tabor has already passed those documents over to the city attorney to begin the kind of the acclimation with those documents, because they are pretty dense, and for us to answer any questions in the meantime. So that was slotted out on the 20th. The original target date for Wave 1, if you went back many months, was April, May, and the coalition was looking to advance that as much as possible. As Henry mentioned, the market is very favorable right now. There's a lot of headroom. There's benefit to communities going earlier. So it was moved into the April timeframe. And when in April is still, for the Wave 1 communities, the 8 or so, is to be determined. There's final agreements that are getting worked out with the utility supplier agreements, and the coalition is pressing very hard to move forward as quickly as possible. But we're not part of that. If you went out 60 days from last Friday, that's April 11th, so we're just assuming for the purposes of our schedule. And the next day, the risk committee can meet and consider, yes, Portsmouth, we understand you want to move forward. You've already signed the member services agreement back in March. We're going to move forward with your procurement. One of the things that's different here than the Wave 1 communities, this process would then allow Ascend to go out into the market, procure, come back. There'd be a rate-setting process based upon the results of those procurements. In this case, we will know the rate. Portsmouth will know the rate because we'll be going with the rate that the Wave 1 communities are using, because that's a February to July rate. So if we went live in June or late May, we'd be on the rate that the Wave 1 communities are on, and then we'd be resetting in August when the utility default service resets in August. So at that meeting, Henry mentioned at April 12th, that's where Portsmouth could tap the brakes for whatever reason, if there was a reason why we don't want to move forward. Even though we have signed the member services agreement back in March, at that point in time, if for whatever reason we get cold feet as a community and don't want to move forward, at that point we can tap out and say we want to wait, okay, on this schedule for a June launch. Then there's a regulatory requirement to give 45-day notice to the PUC and to the utility that we intend to launch. This begins a process where the utility starts to provide us with detailed data sets on the customers, usage data, customer names, mailing addresses, et cetera. And then, as Henry mentioned, there's a requirement 30 days out from going live to begin the notification process of all the electric customers in Portsmouth. And it's a couple-page document, has a lot of good information. It also has another date in there. There's a third hearing date. So 15 days, at least 15 days prior to go live, you have to have one final public hearing that this is about to happen, and that date is in the notice that would go out 30 days prior to go live. And then we would launch. And on this schedule, we would begin on or about May 28th, and customers would come onto the program based upon their meter reading schedule, which is roughly a 4-week cycle for the utilities. So over about a 4-week period, all Portsmouth customers that did not opt out, and just as a data point, in a sense, technical analysis and kind of what happens in community power aggregations, you might expect maybe 5 to 6% of customers would opt out of an aggregation. So that's kind of the number you'd be looking at. But over a 30-day period, all Portsmouth customers would come on, and by the end of June, all the customers would be up and engaged in the program, and they'd be on the same rate for July, but just given the timing of when default rates change in the state, they change in August. So we would have customers come on in June and July. They'd be on whatever that rate is, and then there'd be a communication process. Rates reset, in August of 2023, and there's a strong expectation we would still continue to have rates that are somewhat discounted from the utility rate, whatever those rates are at that point in time. Okay, so there'd be a communication strategy for us, a requirement, because customers would not be on that initial rate more than 2 months, because rates reset in August, and they'd be resetting across the entire state. Okay, so that's the schedule that we would be on if, as a community, as a council, you decide to implement in June. Any questions?
Councilor Lombardi.
So if someone had opted out at some point of Eversource and has signed up with Direct Energy, let's say, does it go smoothly from there too, or are there different rules for different companies?
Yeah, so you would, we would encourage any resident, any customer to check if they have any sort of cancellation fee with a third party, if they wanted to come on to the Portsmouth Community Power Program. But they can opt into the program. The way it works is on your meter reading schedule. So you would finish whatever that schedule is for the month, and then you would come on to the aggregation program. You can opt out of the Community Power Aggregation Program at any time, and you can opt in at any time. But it's largely dictated by what your meter reading cycle is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Councilor Dunn.
Kevin actually just answered my question about opting in at any time if we were to move forward with this, and if residents didn't initially want to be part of it, they would have that opportunity.
Yes. Yes. Yep. And one thing, there was questions the other night I just wanted to mention. For some percentage of a utility customer, there are delinquencies, unfortunately, and so the utility will continue to collect delinquent receivables initially for the community power programs. It's not that we're going to get heavily into some sort of collection process as a community power aggregation. The utility continues to do that process. But there is kind of a game changer that's going on at the state legislature. It's called purchase of receivables, where the utility will take responsibility for even the supplier receivables and will pass over payments on a monthly basis, just discount a delinquency factor. So as a coalition or any competitive supplier in the state, they can count on the revenues coming all the time and don't have to manage individual collection issues with customers. And then the utility works with the PUC to kind of true that up based upon actual delinquency rates from time to time. But it's called purchase of receivables, and I think we have a pretty high degree of confidence that it's going to pass through the legislature here in the not too distant future, which provides, it's a good thing because it provides a steady cash flow to competitive suppliers in the state, including the community power aggregations.
So the key dates really are, this coming council meeting will bring you the energy aggregation plan and ask you to approve that, and I can cover some of the key points in it. Then we have the March 20th vote, if we want to move ahead in June to do the customer end user agreement and the cost sharing agreement, right? And
That would be approved, Counselor, in March.
Right.
Yeah.
And that gets us the agreements as members that allow them to proceed. And then they would start to look at the energy markets. And then April 11th, hopefully the PUC gives us our approval. And right after that, we can then say, do we want to launch in June? And if we do, we give the go-ahead, and Ascend starts to procure power for us and starts the process of the notifications. Or, as Kevin says, we could tap the brakes and go for next spring. I think we had a lot of discussion about this as a committee, and because it is an aggressive schedule, but we thought, number one, there's publicity around the state right now because of the first wave. Exeter, Rye, neighboring towns. Number two, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars of savings for our residents. Why not start that sooner rather than later? And number three, if we waited until spring of next year, we'd have all our agreements in place, but we'd have to start building all the awareness again. And we did feel that we'd made some good headway on that. Did I miss anything?
No. And I would just, I'm retired now, but I spent my career in the utility industry with Northeast Utilities and then Eversource, and involved with programs like this in Massachusetts. And you think I'm a utility guy, why would I be interested in something like this? But the utilities are kind of Switzerland when it comes to these programs. I mean, they're providing power for those who don't choose, and they're just passing it through without any markup. These programs are a great way to provide another option for our residents. They'll still have Eversource. If they wanted to stay with Eversource, they can still go with a third-party supplier. And then they'll have the coalition and this model here is so much more sophisticated than what Massachusetts is doing in terms of the portfolio model and the potential for renewable projects and high assurance of having discounted rates compared to the utility. So at the end of the day, our residents will have really three really strong choices. They can be with the coalition, they can stay with their incumbent utility, or they can go with a competitive supplier, and they can move between those. Our hope with the coalition is we do it well enough that they want to stay with the coalition, but there's not a huge amount of risk with a program like this, and I think there's a lot of upside for our residents.
Councilor Moreau.
You talked a little bit about the upfront financing that you're going to need and how you're going to be paying it back. Do you know the time frame? Do you feel like that? Is it the 5-year time frame that we're talking about before that's all fully turned over?
It's either 3 or 5 years. I'd have to double check that. It's within the 3 to 5 3 to 5 year time frame.
As a user, I am one of those 8 that was a homeowner and a business owner here in town. So when we have issues with our electricity, just speaking as a sort of resident and person who uses it, who would we then contact? Do we still contact Eversource when there's outages? They always say, make sure you tell them, even if your neighbor has. So I just want to make sure that's who people should still be contacting, is reaching out to Eversource when there's issues.
Yeah, if there's any reliability or outages, that's Eversource, and then there will be a call center, customer support center, and if there are questions about, well, I want the Clean 50 or the Clean 100, but anything reliability, Eversource.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Dutton?
More a comment. I just want to extend my kudos to Councillor Tabor, former Councillor Lazenby, along with the Energy Committee members like yourself, Kevin and Allison, and thank you for coming. Henry, I don't know if either of the Peters remember this, but 4 years ago, I had pushed the council through the CIP to purchase, I believe it was renewable energy credits as a way to do something. And this has come so far since then. I remember when this first got discussed, it was just some concept in the sky. I got one of those briefs, and to see it actually here and possibly be implemented by the city, and it's been 4 years coming. So,
Councillor Cook?
Thank you. I just wanted to say, as somebody who joined the Energy Advisory Committee just a little over a year ago, I've been incredibly impressed with the work that this committee has done, and I just want to make sure we publicly thank them for the level of work and commitment that they have made to getting us to this point in consideration of community power.
And I should mention the members, the other members, beside Allison, who incidentally created our logo, and Kevin, who is the vice chair of CPCNH, in addition to being on our Energy Committee. We have Tom Rooney, who was past chair of one of the city's energy committees, and we have Peter Somsich, and Ben D'Antonio, who has a deep background in the energy markets. So if we can get this going, it's going to be because of those folks and their expertise and their commitment.
And Becca O'Brien, too, was a
Becca
key member,
O'Brien, yeah.
and she had to step off for some work she's doing with a new career, but she was a big help, too.
Any other questions from the council? And again, the timeline is, this comes up at the next council meeting, the 21st.
22nd.
21st.
Oh,
And then, which is a Tuesday,
it's Tuesday. That's what-
then we can approve it. It goes to the PUC, and is stated multiple times tonight. That doesn't mean that that's the final go or no go, but that means they approve the plan. We can then still decide whether or not to adopt the plan, ask the coalition to buy rates for us. That would then put us in the June timeframe. And then in August, on there's a resetting of the rates, and that resetting of the rates would be, is that a resetting for Eversource or a resetting for our own customers?
Well, the utilities reset in August, and so we're following them. Once we know what their rate is, we'll know it probably in the June timeframe.
Okay.
Then we're able to beat it and set a rate that beats the rate as of August 1st, and that'll go through January, and then it'll reset again in February. And we didn't talk too much, too. There is a communication outreach program that kind of runs in parallel between now and June, leveraging a lot of the work that Henry's kind of helps Lisa Sweet from Rye and Henry head up the membership committee and are working with the communities, and we will not be bashful about stealing all of the good communication work that they've done with other communities to bring them through launch.
Yeah, we're not on our own for that. We get a lot of support in the outreach effort.
Printed handouts, materials, posters, all sorts of things. You know.
And this is all, Portsmouth residents will be automatically opted in
Yes.
to the program unless they are already using another energy provider, and then they would need to opt in themselves. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. I guess now we'll open it up to any public comment if there's no other questions. Anybody can walk up, state your name and city of residence, and Portsmouth residents go first.
Roy Halsell, 777 Middle Road. I have one question to ask. The upkeep of the equipment that supplies all of this, is it going to change any?
I can answer that.
So typically we don't, it's not a Q&A, So we'll have a discussion after this, but that's appreciate the question, Roy.
Okay.
I'm glad I know questions will come later. I had a question as well, but I also just wanted to take the opportunity to thank you for doing this and just share my praise for all of this work. I'm Elizabeth Blaisdell. I'm a Portsmouth homeowner. I had to move away to California for a year for my job, where we were opted in to a similar program and saw tremendous benefits for the community, as well as growth of clean renewable energy. And we saw it spread, I shouldn't say like wildfire in California, because that's a really bad reference, but like, it spread in a very good way to basically like all around LA. It all started in Ojai, California, and started spraying around. So just really excited to come home, and I felt like I was going to bring a new idea, but it turns out you guys were already working on it. So thanks very much for that. I would highly encourage us to think about the default being to a higher percentage renewable energy, because it's incredible the effects that has in the local community to build a more reliable and clean source of energy. So that was the case in Ojai, where I lived. It was 100% clean renewable energy product that was the default opt-in. So you could go lower, but the power in keeping the default higher meant that there was more investment in local clean renewable energy. So I would just highly encourage that. I was one of the ones going pretty high on the survey for renewable energy. And then I do have some questions, but I also wanted to just throw this out there for consideration too. I don't know how it could work in, but I am also a power generator. I have solar energy all over my home, and I contribute that back to the community through net metering. And right now I am forced to either sell or give away my renewable energy credits to the utility. So Eversource is currently buying my renewable energy credits, and I don't want to give it to them, but I would be very happy to give that those renewable energy credits to a community energy program. And so there are others like me in town too, and I don't know how that could all tie in and hopefully lead to a higher renewable energy default, but it's something that I was sort of made aware about when I was trying to not sell my RECs. It would be automatically kind of donated to the utility. So maybe I blended a little bit into question, but wanted to throw that out there when I had the chance. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And welcome home.
Thanks.
Esther Kennedy, 41 Pickering Ave, and I have to say to Councilor Tabor, I think I found another thing for Sherburne School, maybe some solar panels out there, a solar farm, that might help you all. I would like to state that I wish this PowerPoint had been put up online. It was very detailed, it was very hard to read, and I was hoping to hear from Henry tonight what was he said he didn't want to go in the weeds about payment structure and stuff like that, but that was some of the stuff I was hoping to hear. My questions come in the form of, I know I do happen to be quite familiar owning some land in Western New York with solar farms, and I'm really worried about infrastructure. I have heard all the research you've done. The infrastructure is very archaic. It is old. And so I guess my question is, who pays for that? Who is going to pay for the upgrades if we pull everyone away from a certain entity? Now, I realize that a lot of people on the committee and people that are even sitting here are connected to Eversource. So I'm not sure what the family genetics to all that is. I'm not sure what responsibility the city is going to have financially. I haven't figured that out. I heard that Peter is on the committee, so I'm assuming part of his salary or time is considered in this. But I haven't heard for those taxpayers, and I guess I kind of look at all payments as a tax. I haven't heard what the city is going to have to pay for those people that opt out that might still have some, even it might be micro, amount of their taxes going to this entity or this resource. I like the fact that we're thinking about using more local sources, but I do worry about some of the information that I've been hearing, like now in New Jersey, where the wind power out in the ocean, it's too costly, and there's even been some talk from what I've heard, this is gossip on the street, that some of the businesses are even trying to pull out of potential wind power off our own shores. So I guess my question is what is this group doing, or this entity? I haven't even figured out the entity part of it, who is running who, to be honest with you. I heard tonight that we've got some posters, we got some nice cards. You have a call number if you are want some more information about the thing, but if you have a problem with your power source, then you're going to go right back to Eversource. So I'm really kind of confused about who's running the show and how does that all work. But what kind of resources, no one has explained what kind of resources we have that are more green and what is coming. I know we have some wind power. I saw the blades going up to the North Country, but I also know in Western New York, where we have wind power on farms, the blades break pretty easily. What is this? Where is the green power coming from that is going to really make this a benefit? Because if we don't get that benefit, then I'm not sure what really the benefit and why the city's involved. So I guess I'm missing all those notes. I couldn't see tonight the PowerPoint. We did not get ahead of time. And I hope that it gets put up on the city website, and I hope that the night you guys vote on this, you have a public hearing. So people can have, or we can get information on all these kinds of concepts, because it is still, to a couple people that have approached me, and to my own knowledge, I mean, I read the RSA, and it says that you have 30 days after you submit after the plan is accepted to let the public know, in 15 days. I saw all that. But before the plan even goes forward, when do the public speak at a council meeting? So I'm hoping that you consider that. I'm hoping you can tell me where this green power is going to be coming from. I'm hoping that you can tell me the cost and what is associated with the cost for the city. And I'm hoping you can also tell me who's running the whole show. So those are some things that I haven't been able to find, and I've looked at the RSAs and I've tried to go online, but again, I'm hoping that we get the information and it's not in a vacuum so we can all have a look at it. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. For those watching at home, the presentation is up on the city website under the city agenda for this evening, so you can click on that and follow along.
Good evening, Peter Huda, 280 South Street. First, I'd like to thank the committee for allowing me to speak for kind of an unlimited time on last Thursday. I had a lot of questions. I, too, was looking for the answers in a presentation, and it would have been nice if that was up there. I went into a lot of the detailed questions last week, and I was hoping that some of the questions would be answered there. I think the main thing for the people of Portsmouth to understand is that you, the 9 people on the council, will be voting to opt 22,206 people into this plan. And I would hope that you have done your homework at that point in time. I have gone over the RSAs that were included for this presentation, and the numbers from your surveys are 419 out of 22,206. People don't know what's going on here. So I would really hope that you would do a notification and discuss this in public and kind of follow the RSAs on that. I would also like for Henry or to actually explain so everybody on the council understands about additional projects. The discussion in the original presentation way back in August of 21, I believe, when the city requests a wind farm, solar farm, anything outside of the regular services, I believe Henry said that all of the cost to that will be billed only to the city. Tonight we heard that we will get expertise in reviewing the plans and stuff like that from the consortium. But as far as any cost on that, if I understand it correctly, the cost to that will only be able to come out of this plan if you have reserves. And I also asked what the term of the contract was on last Thursday, and that was answered tonight. Thank you very much. My question is, since this is basically a startup, you're going to have a bunch of startup costs that are going to have to be included in this. So you'll have your raw energy cost, you'll have your overhead, and then it sounded like tonight you said that there will be two types of reserves, one for basically the coalition with any amounts over the amount of the raw material or the raw cost and the overhead. So Portsmouth will not get to do any reserves until after that. Correct me if I'm wrong, Henry, but that would be a concern with everybody kind of getting excited about doing our own projects and getting on the bandwagon with this. So I really kind of wanted everybody to understand what the cost structure is and when the revenues will start building as such. The only other thing, I asked a lot of questions last week, and a lot of them were answered. Thank you very much. I also noted in the RSA that it says specifically that taxpayers who have opted out or who aren't going to opt in. I have already opted out of Eversource, so I will not be included. I'm with the 2006-02. So my question is, it says that the people who are not involved in this will not be paying any charges. Well, I said this on the other night, and I'll say it again. If you have one of our staff people on this commission, i.e. Peter, that is a charge to the taxpayers. We are paying the salaries of all of the staff. So I urge you to think about who you put on here and what effect that will have. And I think the questions for net metering were answered last Thursday, ma'am, if you would care to watch the video. That was a very interesting discussion, and I would urge the council to also understand that and how it affects people who are already doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Petra. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you again, everyone, for coming out. I think that it is a unique time where the inefficiencies of the utilities have been highlighted to a point in terms of that one, it's gotten people's attention, but two, it showed how there's an opportunity to beat those prices. Now the transmission price and the cost of keeping the power lines up, that's still going to stay with Eversource. And so folks at home that are concerned about having to call the city of Portsmouth to fix their electrical lines, fear not. Eversource is still going to be in charge of the transmission and delivery charges of this, but this allows us as the city to join other cities in providing a lower rate and more options in terms of what you procure. And I'm really excited about this. And again, I thank the committee for the work that they've done getting us to this point. And I expect more people to, as we get closer and have more meetings on this, to be as excited as I am to be able to lower energy costs and provide more options. That seems like decisions that should be made for Portsmouth, and I look forward to this conversation continuing at the next council meeting. So thank you very much. Good night, Portsmouth.
Thank you.